Hope I'm audible now. Yeah? Yeah, okay. Hearty welcome to all our media friends here. As you all know, I'm Shruti Patil, ADG PIP Hyderabad here, and it's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Shringla Saab, who's the Chief Coordinator of G20 India, and Shri Chanchal Sarkarji, who's Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, also is the GPFI Finance Lead. And we are all assembled here to know more about this event, that is the Knowledge and Experience Exchange Program for Emerging Economies of the Global South, which is happening in our city, Hyderabad, in the coming 2 days. At the outset, I would request Shri Sarkar to give his opening remarks, and then I would request Shringla sir to give his inputs. Over to you, sir, please.
Thank you, and very warm good evening. CC of G20 India, ADG Shruti Patil. As you know that the second meeting of Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, GPFI, under G20 India Presidency will be held here in Hyderabad from March 6 to 7. The meeting will be preceded by a knowledge and experience exchange program for the emerging economies of Global South to be held during next 2 days, that is 4 and 5th. Yeah. On March 6, 2023, GPFI Symposium on Digital Innovations in Payments and Remittances will also be held for both G20 and non-G20 countries. The GPFI, as you know, working group of G20 Finance Track is an inclusive platform for all G20 countries interested in participating non-G20 countries and relevant stakeholders. So therefore, this is the GPFI is the only forum within G20 that works and talks about the countries who goes beyond G20 countries. The first GPFI meeting was held in Calcutta on 9 to 11 January, where members discussed and agreed upon work programs and priorities for the year. A symposium on unlocking the potentials of digital public infrastructure for advancing financial inclusion and productivity gains was also organized alongside the meetings. And that was instrumental in deepening the understanding of advancing financial inclusion through leveraging digital public infrastructures. And countries were did converge towards the common understanding of DPI's role towards financial inclusion. The second GPFI meeting is expected to take forward the discussions on the development of important deliverables for the year, including those on digital financial inclusion, SME finance and development of financial inclusion action plan, which is due for next 3 years, and also would discuss on the reduction of the remittance cost that jointly countries are committed to come up with innovative national remittance plan that would reduce the cost, as was discussed and agreed by G20 leaders. And guided by Honorable Prime Minister's vision in the first ever Voice of the Global Summit that was hosted in January, and to amplify the voice of the Global South in G20 events to the second G20 GPFI meetings are intended to exchange ideas and experience with emerging economies of Global South. Participation of Ministry of Finance and Central Bank representatives from various countries, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Egypt, Ethiopia, Ghana, Jordan, Malawi, Maldives, etc., along with various other regional organizations such as Asian Development Bank, the African Union Commission, the African Continental Free Trade Area, Arab Monetary Fund, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and Gates Foundation, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and Smart Africa. Experiences and know-how from experts and officers from India, including from the Ministry of Finance, Reserve Bank of India, National NPCI, National Payment Corporation of India, will be shared to reflect the Indian experience in transforming the financial inclusion landscape by leveraging DPIs. This exchange program will also enable non-G20 emerging markets to share their priorities, ideas, and aspirations for advancing financial inclusion, which will be useful takeaways for the G20 as it works towards developing a financial inclusion action plan for next 3 years, 2024 to 26. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your opening remarks. I would now request Shringla sir to address the media here and enlighten them about what's in store for the next 2-3 days, sir.
So, namaskar and good evening. Let me first of all join ADG PIB Srimati Shruti Patil in welcoming all our friends from the media for this press conference which we have in advance of an important meeting of the G20 in Hyderabad. First of all, of course, to put things in context, this is the third month, or rather we've completed 3 months of our G20 presidency. In these 3 months, we have held 36 meetings in 25 locations in our country. In other words, we have undertaken a good number of meetings already. And one meeting has already been held in Hyderabad. As you will recall, the Startup 20 meeting in January this year was held in Hyderabad. This is the second meeting to be held in Hyderabad. The city has very good infrastructure. It is a very appropriate setting for international conferences. So we'll be doing many more meetings in Hyderabad. But we are here, of course, to talk about the meeting that we are going to have. And I'm very happy that we are joined not only by advisor in the Ministry of Finance, who's the chair, who's the lead of our meeting on the global partnership of financial inclusion that will take place, but we also have the Joint Secretary, Mr. Solomon, other senior members of the Ministry of Finance with us today. And so I think we are ready to host this meeting, which will begin tomorrow morning. Now, again, to put things in context, we have the Sherpa track and we have the finance track. Under the finance track, I believe 7 meetings have been held so far. And tomorrow we will be beginning the start of the 8th meeting. Now, what we will have tomorrow is actually what we call the Experience and Knowledge Exchange Program for Emerging Economies of the Global South. So as Advisor Sri Chanchal Sarkar has pointed out, this is really countries that are our partner countries from the Global South, from the developing world, who are going to come here today. Many of them have already arrived, but who will be with us tomorrow to discuss the entire gamut of issues that come under financial inclusion and issues that concern the developing world. Following the meeting, which is tomorrow and day after, that is the 4th and 5th, we will then move into the main meeting, which is the second Global Partnership of Financial Inclusion meeting under the finance track on the 6th. That's Monday, the 6th of March. So this is as far as the program is concerned. Now, of course, Mr. Sarkar has pointed out that the meeting tomorrow is important from the point of view that Prime Minister has already engaged countries of the Global South under the summit of Voice of Global South, in which 125 countries participated. There was very wide participation of heads of state and government. And this summit was very important for us to understand the views, the concerns and the expectations of the developing world as we go on to take leadership of the G20 and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is important for India in its articulation in international fora to be able to really understand what our friends, our partners from the developing world want of us. And I think that was achieved in the Voice of Global South, and we had some very good feedback from that summit. And at that time, I think Prime Minister had pointed out that digital public goods, financial inclusions, our experiences in leveraging technology for the development of public health were important. And the feedback we got from developing countries also was that this was their priority. These were their priority areas. And there was a lot of appreciation for India for its assistance to developing countries during the COVID crisis, especially under Vaccine Maitri and many other initiatives taken to provide pharmaceuticals, medicines, advice, guidance, and vaccines during the COVID crisis. So the meeting that is going to be held tomorrow is really a continuation of that effort to engage the Global South. I think Mr. Sarkar has already given you a sense of the countries that will be participating. Over 40 countries, regional and international organizations will be attending this important meeting tomorrow. They are countries from our immediate neighborhood. All of our neighbors, from Bangladesh to Nepal to Bhutan to Sri Lanka, Maldives, will be present at this meeting. We will also have a very large number of countries from Africa, even from Southeast Asia. You have Vietnam, you have Philippines, you have Thailand who are participating in this meeting. So it's even from Europe, you have Poland that's participating. So I think it's a very, very representative grouping. It's a very wide grouping. The African Union, regional organizations have many of their members who will be joining our meeting. And from our perspective, I think this is a very useful thing. Now, I just wanted to share also briefly. You are aware that the first meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors was held in Bangalore just a short while ago. This was the first ministerial meeting that was held under our G20 presidency. Since then, we've also had a very successful meeting of the foreign ministers in Delhi, which just concluded yesterday. And from our perspective, this is a very good start at a senior level to our presidency initiatives. Now, I'm happy to tell you that, at the meeting of the finance ministers, there was a lot of focus on what the Prime Minister says should be the most vulnerable people of the world. In fact, at the Voice of Global South Summit, he had told the participants that your voice is India's voice, your priorities are India's priorities. I'm quoting the Prime Minister. And at the beginning of the Finance Minister and Central Bank Governors meeting, Prime Minister advised that the meeting should focus on the most vulnerable people in the world. And from that perspective, I think we have already achieved some good results. Under our presidency and as a result of the Finance Ministers meeting and some of the preparatory meetings that have come up, including the first meeting on Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion held in Kolkata, if I'm not mistaken, early January. That meeting also, I think, contributed to outcomes. Just want to share briefly some of the, outcomes that were notched up as a result of these very important engagements from the presidency side, from our Indian presidency. One, of course, was that we have some broad sense of the language to be used on the issue, very important issue of debt resolution in the Global South. As you know, 60% of low-income countries are either in debt or in danger of getting into indebtedness, and this is what our statistics from the IMF have told us. Probably it is, even more acute than that situation because of the COVID crisis and because of the Ukraine conflict. Many developing countries have seen, rising inflation, lower growth rates, very high import bills for food, fuel, fertilizers, etc. This has been a matter of concern and has been articulated in the Voice of Global South Summit also. So I think it is important that we address the global debt issue, and here I think some good progress has been made in that regard. Another success has been made in understanding that a robust digital public infrastructure plays in achieving multiple national goals. In other words, all countries in the G20 and invitee countries and international organizations agree with us that a robust public digital infrastructure is very important in terms of overall national development. And we are talking about at a global level. We are talking also about what it means. It includes economic growth, improved innovation and competition, financial inclusion, productivity gains, financial stability, digital sovereignty, and access to services such as healthcare, credit, and education. I think what is recognized particularly by the delegates was that investing in digital public infrastructure can bring significant savings and productivity gains for governments in the long term. This is while costs decline with the development of additional digital public infrastructure. So with declining costs, there's a long-term gain. There was a lot of appreciations for our unified public payments interface system, UPI system. You are aware that at the previous G20 summit at Bali, Indonesia, Prime Minister had pointed out that 40% of digital transactions in the world were through the UPI system. In other words, 40% of all digital transactions are through UPI in India. So it shows that how developed our system is, how extensive it is, and how much we are contributing to digital transactions on a global basis. So here again, I think there was appreciation for our financial inclusion efforts, including through UPI. And discussions at the meeting in Bengaluru at the, as I mentioned, finance ministers meeting included sharing of information on how DPIs work, solve an individual's many needs and aspirations. So this could be in terms of financial inclusion, social security, health insurance, digital transactions, access to credit, etc. At an individual level, what are the gains through this? There was a recognition of the role of digital public infrastructure in boosting last mile reach in times of a crisis. I think the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, pointed out that India had distributed $37 billion in equivalent Indian rupees digitally to beneficiaries during the COVID crisis, cutting out intermediaries through improved identification and targeting of the needy. I'm just quoting her. So India's experience is seen as very attractive by many, and countries have noted that targeting social benefits through digital identity and digital infrastructure would really help overcome corruption and the risk of exploitation of vulnerable populations. Don't forget that India's digital architecture is open source, that it is owned by the Reserve Bank of India. It is backed by public institutions and the Reserve Bank of India, and not by private monopolies. So there was also some discussion on building interoperability among digital public infrastructure ecosystems of different countries. You are all aware of the agreement between India's UPI and Singapore's Pay Now for transfer of payments across national borders. And I think this model will be replicated extensively. And our endeavor is, as I said, to offer our open source digital platforms to the developing world in a manner that can be scaled up or down. And I think G20 is the platform through which we are taking that initiative. And as I was mentioning, I think there is some very good feedback, very good resonance from our partners in the G20. And I think tomorrow, as we go on to this meeting, there will be many experts who will speak to our friends from the developing countries on financial inclusion, on digital public platforms, and I think this will be a useful session for all concerned in many senses. So essentially, our experience of creating digital infrastructure that enabled us to achieve financial inclusion will be shared with the participants. We will also, I think, be happy to tell them that our know-how, our best practices, our experiences are available to them to take forward collectively the 2030 vision for sustainable development goals and to empower our respective peoples. And as the Prime Minister, I'm just ending with, again, a quote from the Prime Minister at the Voice of Global South Summit, in which he says the need is to identify simple, scalable, and sustainable solutions that can transform our societies and economies. So I'll just stop here in case there are any questions. I think we're happy to.
Thank you so much, sir, for that overview of what this meeting is all about and what to expect in the next 2 days. Sir, if with your permission, can I throw open the floor for questions? I would request our media friends to ask their questions, if any. But before that, please identify your organization, your name, and then you can address your questions, please. Yes? Yes, Balaji. అక్కడ ఇవ్వండి మైక్ ఇవ్వండి అక్కడ
I'm Balu Pulipaka from Deccan Chronicle. The initiative you talked about sharing our digital infrastructure experience, and if I understood correctly, the resources which the other developing nations can replicate or use, does it come with any conditionalities or is it unconditional? Thank you.
Sir would like to listen to all questions and then respond at one time. Yeah, 2, 3.
Yeah. I'm Sandeep Kumar from Telangana today. Given the Ukraine war and the post-COVID consequences on the world economy, how significant is this G20 platform is going to be? Particularly, as you said, knowledge sharing. Will this be confined only to digital public? I mean, not for tomorrow's session, across the other sections. What could be more shared among the developed and the developing countries?
Here, please, the mic.
Hi, sir. This is Gopalakrishna from Sakshi. What are we expecting beyond our G20 presidency through these meetings, sir? I mean, you mentioned about the developing world, the global south. What are we expecting in sort of business or benefits from this presidency beyond our presidency time?
So I think, Balu's question from Deccan Chronicle was really on whether, what we offer is conditional, is subject to conditionalities or is not. At a bilateral level, you're aware that, in the last several decades, we have extended over $100 billion of assistance to countries. In the last 10 years, this trend has accelerated in a certain sense that we've extended more in terms of lines of credit, grants and aid, etc., to our developing partners, especially in our neighborhood. All of this assistance has always been untied, unconditional assistance. But we are talking about the G20 here. We're not talking about India. What we are trying to do is saying that we have an experience. We have certain achievements to our credit. I mentioned UPI, etc. This meeting is about financial inclusion, which is why we are focusing on that. And we are happy to share it through the G20 platform. That is what we are saying. Now, how it is shared and what manner it's shared is for the G20 to decide. Also, you have to understand the G20 is an organization that works on consensus. You need consensus on everything that you do. As president, we can float many initiatives, which we have floated. We will work with our partners and engage them, and that is the process that we are undertaking. I think in the fact that in one round of meetings we have already notched up a certain amount of understanding with our partners, which I did share with you just now. And this is an achievement that Ministry of Finance, as I mentioned, the Minister of Finance, the Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, the senior officers here have worked to achieve, I think is demonstrative of the interest that the G20 and the world at large has on our policies. And the fact that we've consulted our global South partners also on their requirements, their aspirations, their expectations, I think is also important. So to factor all this in, and let us see how that product works out in the end. Ours is only an offer, a goodwill offer that, we are happy to share our experiences, know-how, achievements, etc. Now, as far as Mr. Sandeep Kumar, Telangana today's question was concerned, that given the Ukraine conflict, there are a lot of stresses that have been evident across the world, and what are we sort of sharing in general? I think the G20's effort, and if you look at the broad priorities of the Indian presidency, it really reflects the need of the hour. You know, our presidency has said that we would like to look at how to stimulate, how to accelerated, sustainable, inclusive growth. So growth is an important factor, but it should be inclusive, it should be sustainable, and of course how to accelerate it. The second issue, of course, is that how can we take forward the momentum in the Sustainable Development Goals. I also mentioned that. The SDGs, we're in the middle of the SDG process, it's faltering. How can the G20 under our presidency provide the stimulus to take it forward? The third issue, of course, is to share our own experiences, especially with regard to digital transformations. I think that is a very important aspect, and this we are covering in this meeting and in other meetings of the G20. There is a specific working group also on digital transformations. But when it comes to financial inclusions and financial aspects of digital transformations, then the finance ministry is already, through the finance track, taking very, very important initiatives in that regard. The third, or rather the fourth issue is, what about green development? What can we do in terms of climate justice, climate financing, lifestyle for environment? You know, the Prime Minister has his vision encapsulates that the world working together. You already know about our One Earth, One Health policy, where we have to look at a holistic approach towards health. Similarly, what can we do to have sustainable consumption? UN Secretary General was here in India. He fully endorsed the concept of lifestyle for environment, or life. The world, he said, was living at 1.6 times its ability to sustain. So we're living beyond sustainable levels. So if you want to achieve your climate change goals, you have to live sustainable lifestyles. And this is what we're saying. So we are working with our G20 partners on some high principles in terms of lifestyle. What are the principles of lifestyle for environment? So that is something that we're trying to achieve. So at the environmental level, it's important. Also circular economy, waste to wealth. These are concepts that we have developed and pioneered. When it comes to agriculture and food, we are talking about millets. 2023 is the International Year of Millets, which we have pioneered. Millets today is a superfood. It is climate resistant, it needs very little water, it's very nutritious, but we have been taking it for centuries. So it's our traditional food. So what can we do to promote the use of millets on a global basis? These are things that are there on the table. Then, of course, you have issues such as, counter-terrorism, etc., which are also important, anti-corruption. These are important things. Fugitive economic offenders, how to bring them back. Women-led development is important, how to mainstream gender. You are aware that in all of our development programs, if you see Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, majority of the beneficiaries have been women. 56% of those who have availed of the Jan Dhan Yojana scheme have been women, and in rural areas this has been above 65%. If you look at the Ujala scheme, most of the beneficiaries who have taken LPG connections have been women. So from that perspective, I think this is important from what we are doing in terms of women-led development. But women-led development is an aspect. And finally, reform of multilateral institutions. This is also linked to the issue of indebtedness, which I mentioned earlier, global indebtedness. Countries increasingly finding that they are unable to pay the debts that they have incurred. So we are talking about reforming multilateral financial institutions in a manner that can make them strengthen their mandate so that they can provide more financing, provide better financing, get better access to financing, look at issues like climate financing, for example, or the issues of indebtedness. So all of these are on the agenda, and these reflect the needs of the developing world. So our broad priorities are those that we believe that not just the G20, but the entire world wants. And that's how we have, I would say, looked at our priorities. And these are the initiatives that we are really trying to achieve. And I think if you, perhaps Mr. Gopal Krishna's question was similar. You mentioned business. Business 20 is an important part of the G20. We've had many rounds of the Business 20 initiative, including the inception meeting that was held in Delhi. We've had several meetings in the Northeast, in Manipur, in Sikkim. Sikkim is going to happen now. So I think Business 20 has got off to a good start. And when we talk about Startup 20 also in Hyderabad has been a very successful new engagement group initiated by India. It was not there earlier. I now ask if, in case my colleague Chanchal wants to say anything more. Please, sir.
Just one point, if I may. Relating to these questions that what are we expecting beyond our presidency? Let's see what G20 has done. I mean, if we see that G20, what are the one of 2-3 issues, if I may say, that G20 has as a forum, because mind it, this is a group of divergent countries. Half of them are emerging. So therefore, despite that, there has been agreements on, like for example, debt moratorium services that was agreed in G20. There was the minimum tax, so that tax avoidance and shopping and tripping, that is addressed. And if you see that the financial inclusion, that in last 1 decade, 1.3 billion people have been brought into the banking system. Yes, there are still 1.4 billion people still unbanked, so there were a lot more to do. And also, if we see that one of the target, which is that reduce the remittance cost. So many of these poorer, global South, the recipient of remittances, that our leaders in 2014 had undertaken commitment that will reduce it to a 3% level, which currently is much higher in some countries. So the substantive work has done. So to continue with this agenda is of course remains like and raising voice from the global South, that remains, and we continue to do so. Thank you.
Sir Ratna Chotrani, I wanted to know what are the initiatives being taken for the scare of recession that is facing the globe. Are there any efforts being made to get the sanctions removed and increase the trade finance, which is very imperative? And also at the time of no war era, as announced by Prime Minister Modi, what efforts are being taken to control the funds of states which are involved in terror? Thank you.
Yeah, this is Panikaran from Hans India. Sir, in the given security scenario, you can say political security scenario changing in the world and around India, many bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral agreements, which are say for 40 to 50 years, they are turning vulnerable. How do you look at this interoperability which you are talking about? Won't be subject to that kind of vulnerabilities in the future?
Hello, this is Amjad Ali from BBN News. You have been emphasizing on sustainability. Do you consider Ujala scheme a good example of sustainability, as lot many women are said to have availed the scheme, but they are unable to afford the ever spiraling cost of LPG? Thank you.
Answer to add to that question, again, as you said, inclusive growth is one of the key agendas of G20. But most states in India are complaining about central government not being very inclusive, not taking states into confidence. Your comment on that thing?
So I think Ratnaji had a question on sanctions and on the issue that this is not an era of war, and what are we doing in terms of, I would say, working together on the multilateral side, especially on the business front. Now, of course, I think you're talking about the business side of things. As you know, India has been a strong advocate of multilateralism. And especially on the trade side of things, I think we believe that, many of the issues, we should have a multilateral trade regime, which we do under the WTO. But that is a regime that should be, that should work effectively, and a regime that should really be able to resolve many of the issues that we face today. There are issues that have come up, for example, supply chain resilience. The need for resilient and sustainable and secure supply chains is something that comes up very often. States have become more protective. There is a reason for a multilateral settlement mechanism under the WTO. I also had written a piece in the Hindustan Times just a few days ago in which I do spend at least a para talking about the multilateral trade regime. So please do take a look at that also, and it really explains some of the issues that you are seeking to find answers on. I think Hans, India had raised the issue of political security scenario, interoperability of agreements. Of course, it's a difficult geopolitical scenario because we have gone through difficult times. Let us be clear that the COVID-19 pandemic was the greatest shock to the international system since the Second World War. The COVID conflict is one that has impacted in countries all over the world. You may be thousands of kilometers away. You may have nothing to do with that conflict, but you are affected equally. You are collateral in that conflict. So the interlinkages and interconnectivities that we have developed globally is today, it really means that whatever happens in any part of the world, you are affected. So international governance is at stake, multilateral systems are at stake, and this is what I just mentioned, that our presidency is trying to say that, look, let us strengthen the international governance systems that have been developed after the Second World War. It's been 75 years. We now need to take a fresh look at these institutions, strengthen their mandate, make them more representative, make them, I would say, strengthen them to enable them to meet the requirements of the 21st century. Because if they don't meet them, then you are bound to have gaps which will lead to systemic incoherence at a global level, lead to issues that might not be reconcilable very easily, and not a situation we want. So in that context, I think your question is very relevant. And interoperability of agreements, even those agreements that are winding down, is important. And I think the international community needs to take account of that. And, we can only note it and try and work in that direction. Sustainability, yes, of course. I think, LPG, the Ujala scheme, look at it this way. People, women in our country, ladies, many of them were using firewood for energy, for cooking of kitchens. The Prime Minister, very observant, he noticed that this, the women have a tedious responsibility. Using firewood means it is not only, it is very taxing on the lady because there's a lot of smoke, but also you're cutting down your forests, and environmentally that's not something. So Ujala scheme really meant that, you provide these services to the most vulnerable sections of our population. So we have to see it in that context. Obviously, the price of LPG is not going to remain constantly what it is, but everything is being done to keep those levels at the lowest possible. That's all I can say. I'm not representing the Ministry of Petroleum, so I can't say more. But at a matter of policy, it is very clear that government has done everything possible to keep prices at a level that is as sustainable as possible. And I think as far as center and state is concerned, I hesitate to go into that realm because G20 itself is challenging enough. But if Chanchalji wants to say anything, okay, I think we have.
So should I close it?
Yeah, I don't think there are too many.
Thank you all for being here with us today, and thank you, sir, Shringla sir and Chanchal Sakar sir, for addressing the media and setting the ground for the next 2 days. I would like to make a simple announcement before we all disperse. The sessions for tomorrow and day after are open to the registered media. You can come here, watch the deliberations, but maybe not intervene in a session. If you want to talk to somebody, either from the G20 Secretariat or it will be through PIB. Please get in touch with us. We will facilitate the same. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.